So you accept it all as part of the process. I sort of think, I think life, I look at life as sort of hills and valleys, right? You're the hills are the top of the hills where you celebrate, you have fun, you enjoy it, your life is great. But also recognizing that there's times you're going to go down that valley. And there's going to be times where things aren't as great and they're kind of crappy and you don't feel good. And it's stuff for, it's just not fun. The key to understand is you don't have to stay down in that valley, right? The goal should be to find a way to get back to the top of the hill as quickly as you can.
Hi, I'm Joe Templin, author of the Amazon Kindle #1 new release, Everyday Excellence and Human Swiss Army Knife. This is the Human Kaizen Podcast, a conversation with interesting individuals that embody excellence and help you be better today. The Human Kaizen Podcast is brought to us by Gateway Financial Advisors. When the economy is in a rough patch, you need to have somebody give you the kick in the butt or pull you back from the ledge. You need to have a plan and the right people to have your back. Gateway Financial Advisors, I've known them for decades. They are the right people to help you out. My guest today is Audley Stephenson, host of the Audacious Life Podcast, and previously of The Breakdown with Dave and Audley, where for 5 years he did commentary about the NBA. He is currently the commissioner of the National Basketball League of Canada. So Audley, what I was going to ask you is, what are you reading or learning right now, man?
So I feel like I'm in a blessed place right now, Joe, because so my podcast, the Audacious Living Podcast, it's something that I started during the pandemic. I'm a big basketball guy, and when the pandemic struck, the whole world, we all know the story. It shut everything down March 2020. And, being involved with basketball was what I had this huge void to fill. And I turned to podcasting because it's something I'm really comfortable with. I've done many, many years and it was easy to relatively do. Plus, we weren't allowed out of the house anyway, so I had to figure out something I could do indoors. And so I said, let me do podcasting. And I wanted to do something that was significant and impactful to me. And the theme of audaciousness is really what stood out to me. I started to kind of do a self-analyzation of my own life. And what I identified, Joe, is every time there was a major success, victory, some milestone that I achieved, it's on the strength of me demonstrating some form of audaciousness. So it just naturally made sense to create a podcast or a platform around something that mattered to me, one, and something that I already sort of committed to in my everyday life with not even really effort. It just happened, I guess, if you will. And so I've got this podcast, and I have the unique pleasure and privilege of talking to so many great people. So, and I like to kind of do my homework. So I got a guest coming up. I'll read what they're reading. I'll study what they're all about. And so I'm absorbing a lot because I've got a lot of guests. I think I've done 145 episodes in like a year and a half or so, something like that. And it's just been a magical and wonderful ride.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And, to my listeners, Audley and I first met because I went on his podcast a couple of months ago and I had an absolute blast. It was a wonderful conversation.
Yes.
I call him the man with the megawatt smile for a reason because he just brings and exudes joy. And you want to be around him, you want to interact with him. And so I figured that he could bring some really good stuff to our listeners. So, you were mentioning how you've done a lot of podcasts in the past before you started your own, and this love of basketball. So take us back.
Yeah, so, I've always been a basketball fan, period. Like, when I was a kid, the Magic Johnson Showtime Lakers were my team. And, there's something magical about Irvin Johnson, a.k.a. the name fits so fitting. He brought flair, excitement, a dynamic look that you just gravitated to the game, that no-look pass, and that was him. And so that was in the early days. I can remember falling in love with him. Then I later became a New York Knicks guy, big fan of Patrick Ewing and the Oakley and the Masons, and those were my teams. Those rough, smash mouth kind of basketball back in the day. And I want to say too, being in Toronto, Canada, there weren't a ton of Knicks fans back then. We were hard pressed to get basketball coverage generally because this was before the Raptors. And even when we had the Raptors, we still were hard pressed to get that kind of coverage. So it was really hard at times to follow these teams that I love, but I did nonetheless. And I think 90s basketball was a tremendous time for me. I wanted to be around the game. I wanted to be a part of the game. I quickly realized I wasn't good enough to play at any high level. I was a playground legend, so I did, up to about grade 7, grade 8, I dominated. But then after,
everybody grew.
That's right. Everybody kind of grew. I'm like, oh, I guess not. I got to figure something else out. But the interesting thing is, I truly believe that if there's something that you love and something that you're passionate about, something that you enjoy, we need to find ways to be around them or as close to them as possible. And I'll kind of provide some context to that comment in a moment here. But I went through high school and I did my thing, still loving the game of basketball, and I worked at a sports station here in Toronto called The Score. It was a 24-hour sports television station. I thought that, my goal was, I'll go in there. I worked as an intern. I was an intern there, and I thought for sure the moment they see me, they put me on television, and that's it. I'd be a big star. It didn't work out that way. At the end of my internship, they gave me a handshake. They said, "Thank you very much. We appreciate your efforts," and out you go. And I left, and that was it. I sort of went on my life and sort of thinking, okay, fine, I'll figure out what else to do or what's next. What I didn't realize is that although my initial thought and goal was I'd be a television star when I got there, that's not why I was at The Score. I was at The Score to meet a gentleman by the name of Dave Mendonca, who was also a reporter. Dave Mendonca struck up a fantastic relationship. We're friends to this day, and it was on the strength that he was also a New York Knicks fan, and he loved Patrick Ewing as well, too. Mm-hmm. Again, there aren't a whole lot of us in Toronto, Canada that can gravitate each other that way, but Dave and I did. And 5 years after my term with I finished my internship at The Score, David and I reconnected on Facebook one day, just out of happenstance. We started talking about basketball again. We started talking about the Knicks. We started talking about things that we love. And somewhere in the conversation, we said, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did a podcast?" And that's what happened. We started a podcast. Now, I want to be clear here, Joe. We're talking, this was in 2007.
Okay.
These days, podcasts are around like a business card. Everyone's got one. Back then, that wasn't the case. And so we started this podcast. We were just two guys from Canada talking basketball, which people got, and I think what used to happen, people were really fascinated by that. Like, you guys have basketball in Canada? Like, what's going on?
Talking hockey or curling?
Well, that's exactly it. And we weren't hockey fans on top of that, right? And so we started actually bringing on NBA guests, NBA players rather, as guests. I remember probably one of my favorite ones, well, several, but Kevin Johnson was a point guard with the Phoenix Suns back in the day, and he had just been mayor of Sacramento when we talked about his basketball journey. And we really started to grow this thing, and we ran that podcast for 5 years. And it was just a blast. And so the piece around being around that thing you loved, that resonated with me because I love basketball. I found a way to be close to it, but not actually a part of it. The cool part of the story is in 2011 is when the National Basketball League of Canada got started with their inaugural season. So it's been, the league has been running for 11 years. In 2011 was also the year the NBA was in the midst of a lockout. So there was no basketball. And I had to really think about, well, what do I want to do? If I don't have the NBA, then maybe this new basketball league in Canada, which is a pro league, and was creating opportunity for not only Canadian players, but international players who want to compete at a high level, maybe I'll be a part of that in that capacity. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why we made the switch, or why I made the switch rather, was because in 2011, I want to frame things for you. In the world of where we are today, in the world of social media, everything's accessible in terms of information, right? You know what players had for breakfast. You know what color their shoelaces are. You know where they're going to have their day. It's all accessible. 2011, that wasn't the case. So 2011, we knew that if we didn't have NBA content, we had nothing. And that's the reason why I seriously looked at NBL Canada. I approached them. I knew what I wanted to do because I had done it already for 5 years. I developed this expertise. I developed the reputation as being this basketball guy that had commentary on hoops, and it was done in a fun and entertaining way. So I convinced them to take me on board as a volunteer. And I jumped on board, and again, being close to the game, the thing that you love. I was close to the game of basketball, and I was able to be involved in all sorts of really unique and wonderful ways. My journey with that league continued and I did pretty much everything. I involved with content and public relations and communications, and I grew within the organization. And it wasn't until 5 years in, I was approached and was asked to take the appointment of deputy commissioner. And I was floored, I was honored, I was speechless all at the same time, but I accepted it. Actually, quick funny story. I remember I got this call on the Friday, and it was a Friday when I got the call. And I remember the board of governors, the chair of the board, called me and said, "Audley, we've been thinking about this situation, what we have here. We want a deputy commissioner, and we're thinking we want it to be you." And I was like, again, you're faced with these moments of, oh my gosh, and wasn't expecting it. And I remember I was like, okay, can you give me the weekend to think about it? Because I really, I'm not really sure. And I tell you, Joe, I remember going, okay, and I hung up the phone. And the moment the phone hung up, I said, what are you doing? What in the world are you doing? Pick up the phone, call him back, take the job, and go do what you were meant to do. And I think that's really important because we oftentimes second guess ourselves. A situation comes, we're presented with something, and it's like it's meant for us, and it's just like, I don't know, or the imposter syndrome sets in. And we start to wonder if this is meant for us. And we have this complex around people are going to see through me. They're going to say I'm a phony, I'm a fake. I've never been a commissioner before. Of course you haven't been a commissioner before. That's why it's called a new opportunity. So I jumped in head first. 3 years later, they removed the title of deputy and they made me full-time commissioner. And that's now what I do with the league. But again, it goes back to your question about, where it started for me. It started for a love. It started for a passion, but more importantly, it wasn't just me saying I really love the game. I really love the game. It was I love the game. How can I be part of it in a new and exciting way? And this is above any dream I would have ever imagined.
And even if you had made it into the NBA, a career in the NBA lasts 5 years, 7 years. Yeah. This is the sort of thing where you can be around what you love for decades.
That's right. And I think what's happened as well too is it's given me opportunity to be a part of it in a way that I would just never imagine. We've got young players, and I spend a lot of time in school. I go to post-secondary institutions. I'll talk about. So now I'm not just talking to potential basketball players anymore. Those are who want to get in sports management or the administrative side of things, or medical staff or therapy staff. And so I've talked to all kinds of individuals who have an interest in being a part of the game in some capacity. So I really never would have imagined I could have had the kind of impacts I've had. And I'm just so grateful that I can do what I do and love it.
So tell my listeners more about the league. Where are you guys now? How do you see it going over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so NBL Canada started, like I said, we just finished up our 10th year last season. The league is Canada's longest running professional basketball league, and so that's something that we're extremely proud of. There have been a number of leagues started numerous times, but for one reason or another, they faltered, it didn't work out. We've gone and kept going, and we still continue to grow. Our teams are primarily, they're all in Canada. Right now, we've got 4 primarily in Ontario. We just struck up a partnership with an American Basketball League called the TBL last season. So we do some joint games together. We took a severe hit as a result of the pandemic. And going into the pandemic, we had 8 teams. We came out of the pandemic, we only had 4 that were going to be able to continue. So, we are definitely in rebuilding mode, but we're very excited about what we have in front of us. And I got to tell you, Joe, when I came into the league, the table was kind of set for me already. We had teams in place. Everything was already set up. And it was cool because it was really easy not easy, but it was easier for me to assimilate myself and figure out where I could make the biggest impact. Now because we've taken a step back, I'm now part of the development and the rebirth and the regrowth. And that's also, there's some excitement about that, the opportunity to build something. And so that's what I'm really, really thrilled about right now.
So you guys have essentially gone through the classic J curve where you have this decline because of extraneous circumstances with the pandemic, but you've got the opportunity to change the trajectory on a going
That's right.
basis. So 4 teams again this year, and where
So we've got the London Lightning, located in London, Ontario, Windsor Express, the Kitchener Waterloo Titans, and the Sudbury Five are the 4 primary teams in our league. The TBL, the Canadian Basketball League, they actually have some teams here in Canada as well. There's one in Newfoundland, one in Montreal, and soon to be a 3rd team in Quebec. So those 7 teams will all play one another as part of that model. So although we have 4 teams, there are actually significantly more because you've got those three others, and plus we have some U.S. teams that are also visiting us to play as well.
Sweet. So any chance the Albany Patroons are coming up?
Albany Patroons, we went to go see them last year. They actually, a neat story with the Albany Patroons, and I wasn't able to make it down to their arena, the legendary arena that they play out of. But the Albany Patroons, I think they will be up this season. The London Lightning, which became the eventual champions last season, they snapped the London Lightning's 13-game win streak. And so there's a bit of a rivalry, I think, has been developed as a result of that. But we definitely will be seeing the Patroons.
Those damn Americans coming on up.
It'll be fun.
Maybe I'll get on the team bus and come on up and see you guys for that one.
I'm sure they'd love to have you.
So with the Canadian Basketball League, how do you see this growing over the next couple of years? I mean, so you've got this essentially 7 teams, you're playing some American teams and all that. When does the season start? Clue people in, because I've got a lot of listeners throughout Ottawa.
Yeah, for sure. The league will start in January and will run from January to about April. Website nblcanada.ca is our website. We're quite active on social media, so certainly you can connect with us there. But where we see ourselves is a platform for Canadians to really chase their dreams, and quite frankly, it's grown beyond just Canadians now, because you've got any international players. You've got a lot of players that play in our league from the U.S. That maybe and so the illustration I oftentimes give is that if you're a young Canadian basketball player. My son's 16 years old. He's got aspirations of, playing professionally someday, somewhere. If he had it his way, he'd get a scholarship to some big Division I school. Maybe he'll get called by Duke or Kentucky or whoever, and he'll go down and play. At the end of his career, let's just say, hypothetically, he isn't able to make it to the NBA because as good as he is, he's not quite there. Oftentimes, players in that window, and really, if you look at it, there's only about 700 jobs in the NBA. There's quite a number of players that aren't just going to make it because it's a numbers game. At that point, players have a decision to make. Okay, if they want to continue their playing career, they can either go overseas internationally, or they can look at options closer to home, i.e. Canada. And for many, the idea of playing closer to home, the idea of not having to sleep away from your family and friends, the idea of your cell phone working, the idea of learning, not having to learn a new language, all these things are appealing. And so you have a young player, and again, I'll use my son AJ as an example. AJ, he's left Canada at a young age. His family had an opportunity to see him play at a high level, because in person at least, because we didn't go down and make the trip or whatever. I'm using hypothetical. He now comes home to Canada and he gets to play in front of family and friends. That's appealing for a lot of people. In fact, I don't know if people recognize how significant that is for a player to be able to put their wares on display in front of their family and friends. And so we provide that platform, very competitive, very high level, and oftentimes you'll see players go on other things internationally around the world, and we're just pleased to be part of the process.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So one of the things that I hope my listeners caught on to was the opportunities and development that you're doing beyond the paint that is critical, and combining that with having love for what you're doing. In your case, basketball and then unifying it, podcasting and all that.
Yep.
But that is really one of the keys to being able to have a sustainable career that you're really into, where it's not burning you out necessarily because of the love and desire for what you're doing.
Right. You want to jump out of bed, Joe. Like you want to jump out of bed, and I really do. I feel there's a sense of gratitude for being able to do what I enjoy and being around it the way I am. There's certainly an appreciation, and those are that's a great place to be because you're always excited. Right, you're always looking forward to it, and when you're in that space, you oftentimes have more creativity. The creativity level increases. Your happiness, your joy, all these things and they're all positive. Serotonin level just rises through the roof because you just feel great. And really, I've said that, and I truly believe this, that the quality of life significantly improves when you have something to look forward to on a daily basis. And I truly feel like I have something daily to look forward to. It's like, what's going to happen today? And what do I got to do here? And now, and I want to kind of put, frame in context, because it's not to say I love every aspect of the job that I do, because I don't, right? Sometimes I got to suspend players. I don't like doing that. I hate the schedule making process because it's tough, right? But I got to do it anyways. It doesn't mean that, it's always this, rocket, fuel of blasphemy of the universe, right? But what I'm saying is that you can feel good. You'll have down moments, but you don't stay down because you're still in a good space. If that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, you've got this tremendous love for the game, literally. And because of that, you're willing to deal with the 15 or 25% of the time where it's really not fun.
Right.
And you deal with that so that you can do the fun things, like you put the schedule together, then you can have games that you can watch, and you can have the highlights from the players, and you get things to celebrate and all that. So in a lot of ways, especially people who are in sales, or people who are trying to build an organization, a start a company, there's all this really, mind-numbingly boring sometimes, or obnoxious, or emotionally draining work without the rewards. But as you stick with it, you get to do the fun stuff.
You got it. And that's exactly what it is, right? And so you accept it all as part of the process. I sort of think, I think life, I look at life as sort of hills and valleys, right? You're the hills are the top of the hills where you celebrate, you have fun, you enjoy it, your life is great. But also recognizing that there's times you're going to go down that valley. And there's going to be times where things aren't as great and they're kind of crappy and you don't feel good. And it's stuff for, it's just not fun. The key to understand is you don't have to stay down in that valley, right? The goal should be to find a way to get back to the top of the hill as quickly as you can. And you can apply that principle to life and facing adversity and challenges. There's going to be dips and highs and lows, dips and, the ups and downs. And I think if you keep that in perspective, that where you are is temporary. Where you are is as temporary as you want it to be. Because I think we determine how long we stay down, and again, I want to keep that analogy downs, lows in mind, because that's what I'm saying is, bad things are going to happen, tough times are going to exist, challenges are going to take place. It's okay to feel not good about them. It's okay to be bad. It's okay not to be not happy, but we choose how long we stay in that space for, and that's the key.
Right. So you get knocked down. You can stay down for, the 3 count. You can stay down for the 8 count.
You got it.
Don't stay down for the 10 count. Get back up, get back in there and keep fighting. And eventually you're going to win if they can't knock you out.
That's right. Well, I remember a Michael Jordan quote. He says, "I've never lost a game of basketball. I've only run out of time."
Awesome quote. So are there any other great sports quotes that you want to toss on out? Because I'm in love with utilizing quotes as a way to be able to begin conversations or analysis around things. So,
good question. Not necessarily sports that comes to mind, but there was a quote, and I'm going to butcher it totally, I know, but it's around the idea of leadership. if you're and how you define leadership, and if your actions can inspire and impact and give hope, then you're a leader, right? And that's what it is. If you can do the things to impart on other people, you can be a leader. And what's really interesting, because I say for me, I tie everything back to being audacious. And I think if you're being audacious, demonstrating audacity, then you're being a leader. I was recently talking to a friend of mine who's an accountant. And she was talking about the fact that she works for this firm, she enjoys what she does, but she really wants to go on her own. And she feels there's a niche market to work with small businesses that are looking to grow and it can use her services. And I said, that's fantastic. Like, why don't you go after it? And she goes, yeah, my plan is to do that. And here's what I thought was really interesting. She said that there's a woman that she doesn't know personally, but she saw her. She was an accountant, and she saw her do the exact same thing, and her business is now thriving. I can guarantee you that woman that she referred to, at some point before she launched on her own, she felt fear. There was some level of uncertainty. She doubted. Maybe the imposter syndrome sat in with her, and she's like, I don't know if I can do this. But she did it anyways. She took action anyways. And as a result of her taking that action, she's now inspired someone else who doesn't even know her. They don't know each other personally. And that's what I'm talking about, that we take action, and that's how we're demonstrating our leadership. And that's how we're inspiring others. And that's how we're encouraging others to be as great as they possibly can be through our actions. And so I always say, take that first step. You have no idea the ripples. You have no idea the impacts. You have no idea the number of people you can touch. Very similar to, I'm sure if you asked everyone, who their favorite teacher was, everyone can identify, Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so, he brought all the best out of me. And chances are that teacher probably doesn't even know. And chances are that teacher, the thing that they instilled, the thing that you remember them for, they were just doing out their natural innate ability. It wasn't because they were getting a paycheck every 2 weeks and it was their job to do. They were doing what was natural to them. And that's why it's so important that all of us behave how we naturally are supposed to be, because of the impacts.
And that comes back to what you were saying earlier about doing what you love and being around what you love.
You got it.
So those teachers who just love to teach and would be teaching, or still teach even with all the crap around it, they're doing that. You with the basketball, this person with the accounting. I mean, my mom was an educator, and she instilled a love for learning into us, which is part of the reason why I'm like this even to this day.
Right.
Because we were encouraged to go down the rabbit holes and pursue the interests and all that.
Yeah.
And so having those sort of passions well at forth, and as Tim Ferriss talked about, it becomes eustress. It's not necessarily stressful, even though there's some stressful components of any job, any company that you build, any sport. I mean, if you're trying to achieve greatness in anything, there's going to be parts of it that you don't like. But it's just your heart's beating for that thing. That you said, you just wake up excited because of it.
Just go.
That's a great starting recipe for success overall.
It totally is, Joe. And I tell you, I think if we can aim to find a way to be in that space as much as possible, not to say that we'll always be able to stay there. And again, keeping the analogy of the hills and valleys, we're not always going to be there. But if we can stay there as much as we possibly can and find ways to, put our flag and pitch our tent and we're not going nowhere, that'd be a fantastic place to be. And again, it really goes back to doing what we're supposed to, being the individuals that we're supposed to be, and living our life in that fashion. I'm a father of three. I've got an adult daughter. I've got a 16-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter. And my 16-year-old son, he's the big basketball player. And he and I were driving a couple of weeks ago. And we just started talking generally. And he kind of threw out the blue. He said, "Dad, you're pretty inspiring." And I was like, whoa. Stop, put the brakes on. Wow, what did you say? It was one of those moments. And I was like, oh, wow. So I said, I wanted to explore this. So I said, oh, why do you say that? Like, how have I inspired you? How I inspired you? And he was like, yeah, you have, because I watch the way you interact with people, and I watch the way you engage with people, and I watch the way how you bring out of people, and what that's done for me is it's built my confidence, because sometimes I can be a little shy, and sometimes I can be soft-spoken, but I recognize that I need to use my voice, because that's how you can have impact on people. And I was like, wow. And as a father, you'd appreciate this. Like, you have that moment where it's like, my work here is done. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've done, and I tell you, I'm a little emotional now about it now, but at that moment, I wanted to blubber, like I wanted to cry like a baby, because, at the end of the day, as a parent, you want to be able to pass on things to your children that they can use in their lives to be better. And here he is talking about not only being better for himself, but impacting other people, man. That's huge.
And overcoming his fears and being able to go on out and serve others. And the saying, watch what you do because little eyes are watching.
Got it.
Your kid has gotten some of the best leadership lessons from you. And I hope my listeners, glom on to some of the little pearls hidden throughout here. So do you have any more pearls that you can share with my listeners? Some pearls of wisdom or insight?
Yeah, I'll tell you again. So much is wrapped around us taking that first step, and I want to clarify. Some people sort of think when I talk about audacity or being audacious is that you're doing these wild skydiving, mountain climbing sort of things that are just way out there and exuberant and extravagant, and that's not what it is. I mean, those things can be, sure, but it's not limited to that. It's actually it's quite broader than that, because if you're able to, and I use the example of taking that first step, right? If you're able to take that first step in spite of the fears, in spite of the uncertainties, in spite of the doubts, in spite of the suspicions, then you're onto something. You truly are making a tremendous impact on people in profound ways. And again, you talk about little eyes, and people are watching and people are paying attention, whether we realize it or not. And that's why it's so important that we always have to take action. And where that's inspired me is I sort of created a framework, if you will. I called it the BOLD framework. BOLD, B-O-L-D, it's an acronym that I use. The B in BOLD is better than you were yesterday. And you would appreciate this because it's really about learning and developing and growing. And there are many ways that we can do that. Listening to a podcast like yours as an example, books, you can take a course, you can study, you can listen to speakers. But the idea is wherever you're getting your insight from, that you're finding what works for you. And I say finding what works for you because not everything that's out there you can adopt for yourself. There's some things that don't fit into. So it's the idea of being able to discern what's for you and what's not. And so the BOLD is better than you were yesterday. The B, I should say, is better than you were yesterday. The O is outlasting adversity. And I talked earlier about I referenced a couple of times the hills and the valleys. And the way you understand, the way you outlast adversity is you recognize that what you're going, you increase your perspective to recognize that what you're going through is sort of part of the journey. We all are going to experience, Joe, some really crappy things. We're going to experience some things that will kick us in the gut. When my second daughter was born, she's on the autism spectrum. And at the time that she was born, her speech was severely delayed. And I can remember having these images and visions in my mind of my daughter never being able to say daddy ever. And that was a gut shot. It really, truly was. I look at her now. She certainly has developed, but what she does on a regular basis is remind her of the power of human potential and what you can do and why you never, ever, ever count anyone short or sell them out because you have no idea, what they're about to achieve. We may want it to happen at a certain point, but that's not for us to say. I remember vividly one day I was driving my daughter. Again, remember, this is a girl who doesn't have words. She can't speak, right? And we were driving down to sort of a semi-business residential area in downtown Toronto, and they had stores on either side. And as we were driving by, I could hear these random words, store, butcher, open, flowers. She was reading the signs on the stores as we're driving by. And here I am thinking she'd never be able to talk. So when I talk about the human potential and, the things that people are able to do, never sell them short. And so again, outlasting adversity, it's so, so important. The L in that framework is live your truth. Okay? We want to be as authentic as we possibly can. And it's so important that we do. It's so important that I live my truth and be that basketball god that I know that I am, because I can now influence others in wonderful ways. And I recognize that. So it's so important to be the person that we're supposed to be, that authentic individual that we were. And sometimes it'll take some work to figure that out. Sometimes we don't know in that moment. Sometimes we have to go through some experiences to help us get there. But it's important to understand that they all feed into who we are, the good times as well as the bad. So when we get down that valley, take what we can, because maybe that will teach us to be better next time, or do things differently, or increase our learning, right? So the learning thing. And then lastly, the D, disrupt the norm. Break the status quo. Do not follow the pack. Oftentimes, there are a group of individuals going a certain way, and we just figure, well, that's the way to go, so we go as well. Not recognizing that our biggest innovators in society, our most successful leaders, were the ones that didn't follow the norm. They disrupted the norm. They didn't follow the pack. They didn't care about status quo. Our most creative individuals, the Steve Jobs in the world, the Bill Gates in the world, they did not follow the pack. They wanted to disrupt the norm. And I think if we can bear those that framework in mind, better than where you were yesterday, outlast adversity, live your truth, and disrupt your norm, I truly believe that that's how we can live the most audacious life we possibly can.
Good. I'm cutting it right there. We can get no better than that. You heard him, ladies and gentlemen. Be bold. My friend Audley Stephenson, the commissioner of the National Basketball League of Canada, and a hell of a man. I'm Joe Templin. Be excellent and grow today.